Let's review long division of numbers. We're going to do this problem over here on the right, so add this to your notes. When we're doing long division, you're looking at how many times the number on the outside. This is 457 divided by 3. How many times does 3 go into 4? Once. And 1 times 3 is 3. What do we do here? We subtract. 4 minus 3 is 1. And then we bring down the 5. We're going to call that one cycle. Now let's do another cycle. How many times does 3 go into 15? 5 times. 5 times 3 is 15. Subtract and bring down the 7. How many times, this is another new cycle, how many times does 3 go into 7? 2 times. 2 times 3 is 6. What is that 1? This is a remainder. In elementary school, we wrote like 152 R1. In middle school, if you did long division, you would do like 0.0, bring that down and keep going to get the decimal. One of the things that I don't think they ever really taught you is that this means that you can divide 457 by 3 152 times with 1 out of 3 left over. So we put the remainder over the number that we originally divided by. That's a key thing that we're going to have to remember once we get through to the end of all this. This would have been so much easier if they would have taught us that back then. And honestly, now with how your brains have developed and how much math you've had, does long division really seem that difficult? No. No. Do you remember struggling with it in elementary school? Yeah. Probably. But now it's like, oh my gosh, long division is so easy. All right, we're going to go kind of backwards. We're going to start with example 3. I know this is weird, but sorry, whatever. So example 3, we are doing x to the third minus 4x plus 6 divided by x plus 3. There's one kind of screwy thing with long division. You cannot have any missing terms. If we start with x to the third, we need to have a spot for x to the third, a spot for x squared, a spot for x, and a spot for a number. So is there anything missing in there? X squared, we're going to put a 0x squared minus 4x plus 6. So right here, we are missing the x squared term, so we're sticking a 0x squared in there. You have to have a place for each of those things. We are going to divide this by, I don't like how that's not straight, x plus 3. We're really going to focus on the x. The plus 3 just kind of tags along for the ride. It's just there. We'll use it, but it just kind of tags along. It's just, yeah. Okay, our first cycle. We want to do x times something to give us x to the third. X times what is x to the third? X squared. When we did long division of numbers, once we got that number up on the top, what did we do with that number? We multiplied it with whatever's on the outside and wrote it underneath. So x squared times x is x to the third. X squared times 3 is 3x squared. So you take that number that you figure out on the top and you distribute it to both of those things that you're dividing by. Okay, what do you think we're going to do as our next step? Subtract. We're going to subtract this entire polynomial. That's why we talk about polynomial subtraction before we do division. X to the third minus x to the third, that's going to be 0. That term cancels, and that always will cancel. If it doesn't cancel, you did something wrong. 0x squared minus 3x squared. What's 0 minus 3? Negative 3x squared. And then we bring down the minus 4x. We've completed our first cycle. Now we'll go back and do the next cycle. For our next cycle, you're always going to look for whatever is lowest and to the left. So now we're looking at negative 3x squared. We need to do x times something to give us negative 3x squared. Negative 3x. Once you figure out the number on the top, distribute that number to both the x and the 3. So negative 3x times x is negative 3x squared. Negative 3x times 3 is negative 9x. Once you have those numbers underneath, we are going to subtract. This is the most common error, is forgetting that you are doing subtraction. Negative 3x squared minus negative 3x squared. That'd be negative 3x squared plus 3x squared. Those cancel. What is negative 4x minus negative 9x?
Negative 13x.
Positive 5x. It's really good to have a calculator next to you for this, honestly, because I always second guess myself when I'm doing simple addition and subtraction. Remember, I'm like simple math I'm not very good at. It's the complex stuff that I'm really good at. So negative 4 minus negative 9, just stick that into your calculator and then you can see the 5, so it's 5x. Bring that 6 down. You're now done with the second cycle. Now we move on to the third cycle. Now I'm focusing on 5x. X times what is 5x? 5. Then we multiply. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times 3 is 15. We are going to subtract. The first term cancels. What is 6 minus 15?
Negative 9.
Negative 9. Do you see how we're now done? There's nothing else to pull down. Once you're done, this number is your remainder. Okay, so our answer is what we have up at the top. At the very top is the answer to this division problem. X squared minus 3x plus 5 minus 9 over x plus 3. You put the remainder over what we originally divided by. Okay, now what does this mean? If I took this and multiplied it times x plus 3, I would end up getting x to the third plus 0x squared minus 4x plus 6. We just undid the multiplication. Sometimes it'll work out perfectly with no remainder. Sometimes there will be a remainder. Okay. Now let's go over to example 2 and let's try example 2 together. I always want you to look for missing terms. So we are starting with negative 3x to the third. Do you notice that there's no x squared term again? So we need 0x squared plus 4x minus 1. We are dividing by x minus 1. Okay, first round. We're looking at negative 3x to the third. We need to do x times something to give us negative 3x to the third. So we need the negative 3, x to the, how many x's do we need to go from x to the third? 2 more. Now, multiply this and write it underneath. I want to see if you can do that step on your own. Pause the video. Then we subtract. The first part cancels. 0 minus 3 is negative 3x squared. Bring down your plus 4x. For our next round, x times what is negative 3x squared? We need the negative 3, and we need another x. Multiply this negative 3x to both the x and the minus 1. So negative 3x times x is negative 3x squared. Negative 3x times negative 1 is positive 3x. You are subtracting. You should get 1x and then bring down the minus 1. I like to write ones in front because I think with this subtraction it helps if you have a 1 in front so you can see those numbers. All right, next round. X times what is 1x?
1.
1. So that's a positive 1. 1 times x is 1x. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. If we subtract these, what's going to happen?
We get a positive 1.
Negative 1 minus a negative 1, that's negative 1 plus 1, that is 0. Your remainder is 0 on this one. No remainder. So our answer is negative 3x squared minus 3x plus 1. And there's no remainder, so that's your answer. If I took this and multiplied it times x minus 1, we would end up with negative 3x to the third plus 4x minus 1. We just undid that multiplication like we did yesterday. Get started on number 1 on your own. There is something weird that happens after the first cycle, so do the first cycle and then play the video to see what we need to do next. Okay, so here's what happens after the first cycle. They both cancel out. You don't even need to write this 0x squared. You could even just write 0 or nothing, but we do need to bring down the next term. Basically what happens is there's like an x to the third cycle and then an x squared cycle. We just skipped the x squared cycle. The x squared cycle was in with the x to the third cycle. So now we are doing x times what? Notice I go to the space directly above what I have. X times what is negative 2x?
Negative 2.
Negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. When I go to subtract, do you see how there's a hole above the 2?
Yeah.
You don't want a hole. Bring that 8 down as well. The reason we ended up having to bring down 2 things is that because that x squared cycle was skipped, we skipped bringing something down in the x squared cycle, so we need to bring down 2 things for the x cycle. Now we subtract. The first term cancels. 8 minus 2 is 6. And that is our remainder. This is kind of nice because by skipping that x squared cycle, we're done a lot faster. So our answer is x squared minus 2. And how do I write that remainder in my answer?
6 over x minus 1.
6 over x minus 1. Okay. Now on your assignment, your problem is going to start sometimes with x squared. If it starts with x squared, you start with x squared. You don't have to put a 0x to the third. You're only putting in zeros if there's a term missing in between your first and your last term. So don't add a 0x to the third on the front. Only add that 0x to the whatever if there's something missing in between your first and your last term. So say we started with, I don't even know. Say we started with x squared plus 2x minus 5 divided by x minus 1. You would not put a 0x to the third in there. You don't need a 0 at the front. But if we had x squared minus 5, then you would need to add in the 0x term. So only add in that 0 if there's something missing in between. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay.